and welcome to the Research Works podcast, brought to you in association with Curtin University and the Healthy Strides Foundation. Your hosts are Dr. Dana Poole and Dr. Ashley Thornton, and together we will interview world-leading researchers in the area of child health to support your practice in being more evidence-based.
The team at the Research Works podcast acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land and waters on which we live and work. We pay our respects to all First Nations peoples, elders past and present, and would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we record this podcast each week, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation. We recognise their continued connection to this beautiful budja we call home.
Hello everyone, I'm so glad you decided to join us for another episode of the Research Works podcast.
Yes, welcome back everyone. Happy to have you here again. Today we're talking with Georgia McKenzie, who is a PhD student at La Trobe University in Melbourne, Victoria. Welcome, Georgia.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us today. I think we're really excited to talk to you about this work.
Yes.
It connects a lot of favourites for us. It's qualitative, it involves physical activity, so it's right in our wheelhouse, tick, tick, tick.
Yep.
And the article that we're discussing for all of our listeners is called Finding What Works for Me, a qualitative study of factors influencing community gym participation in young adults with cerebral palsy. And this was published in Disability and Rehabilitation in June 2022.
Yeah, well done, well done.
Yeah. So let's tell you a bit more about Georgia. Georgia McKenzie is a physiotherapist at the St Vincent's Hospital Young Adult Complex Disability Service, working with young adults with cerebral palsy to make the transition from paediatric to the adult world. She's a current PhD candidate with La Trobe University and CP Achieve, investigating the factors influencing gym participation for adults with cerebral palsy and how to best support participation in the gym. She has a special interest in working with young adults to engage in physical activity within their local communities.
Love this. Again, you can see why we love all this.
Yeah, I think that transition space is
great.
such an important one. And so, this is really valuable work, Georgia.
Thank you. I'm obviously quite interested in it.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's one of those things that, when we listen to what the content that's about to come, I just know there's going to be a lot of things we can think about. It's relevant for so many people. Kids do grow up to become adults. We want healthy lifestyles, and what they say matters. And I think that's why this paper, really caught our interest and why we wanted to have a chat with you about it today.
For sure. All right, so that's the formal getting to know you bit. The informal getting to know you bit is our little icebreaker question, the humble icebreaker.
Oh, I love it.
So today it's a bit of a gym theme.
I see where this is going.
Yeah, so I would love to know, Dana and Georgia, what is your favourite gym class or exercise?
You go first, Georgia. Guess first.
Okay, all right. It's interesting because prior to this research, have not been a gym person myself.
Okay.
But I have found that I really love strength training. So I like to go in, do the strength exercises and mostly avoid the bike and the treadmill. So I'll say strength exercise.
Yeah.
You get bang for your buck with that. And I think increasingly more people understand that, don't they? I mean, there's been this whole rise of it on Instagram, I think, as you see, and people are doing more strength stuff. Look, I'm not really, I did go to the gym a lot when I was younger, and I just hit this point where I was like, I just don't like this environment for me. I just didn't like the gym setting. I just like being outdoors for me.
Yeah.
So I run a lot. And it fluctuates how obsessed I feel with running from any point in time. And at the moment I'm doing, as everyone's going to be sick of me saying this, I love my zone 2 training at the moment because I'm trying to get back into running again. So I'm just watching my heart rate so that I can actually enjoy my run and actually improve my fitness. So I'm really loving that. But if I had to choose a particular exercise for just getting bang for your buck, I would have to say the humble burpee, because you can do a minute's worth of it. And you can tick all your boxes. Like your heart rate's elevated, you've got everything, the blood's pumping, your brain's activated, and you can get going into stuff. And I feel like, you know, if you feel like you need to just get your heart rate up, that does it. First 2 burpees, you're like, I got this. 3, 4, 5, I don't got this. I can't get up off the floor.
Burpees.
Well, just to get it's not a lovely exercise, but, you know, you just ticks the boxes quickly.
Yeah. No,
all.
I
you know?
appreciate that. It's taking me back to my hockey preseason days. So there's some underlying trauma there that I'm just working through, as you mentioned burpees.
I know they seem more as punishment, aren't they?
100%. 100%. For me, I love a good deadlift.
Yeah.
Love a good deadlift. I don't know, there's something really satisfying about it.
True,
because it's easy. Like the technique, I mean, it's hard to get the technique right, but it's quite a straightforward movement. But I went to one spin class. I've been to one spin class in my life. And I actually despite being on a bike, which I don't like so much, I really enjoyed the enthusiasm that everyone, like I think everyone who's at a spin class is really buying into the spin class vibe. So that was really fun for me.
Okay, yeah. At least that's fun. I think that'd be really cool.
Yeah.
You know, what I'd love to say, I'm just going to add this in, not that I'm just going to try to take over this clip at all, but I wish I could say my favourite exercise was a pull-up. I really want to be able to do an
aspirational exercise.
It's aspirational, and I see it. And look, one of your PhD supervisors I know can just nail these. So Claire can
if you're listening.
Oh my gosh! And I just want to do one. And
me too. It's like a life goal.
Right.
Just one.
Yes. And I feel like all you need is one. Because if you were ever like hanging over the edge of a cliff and you need to save yourself, right now I couldn't. I just have to fall. Whereas if I could just do one pull up, I could save myself. I feel like it's survival.
I've done one once.
Have you?
Well, but I had a caveat. I had the big elastic support band under me, though. Pushing my legs up. So it was satisfying to do it. Yeah. Couldn't do it without the band, but so if I was on the cliff, I'd need the band.
Someone give me a boost.
Yeah.
Just a note from the producer's desk.
Yes.
Exactly where are you guys, what are you guys doing when you're hanging off the side of cliffs?
What was Tom Cruise doing when he was hanging off the side of a cliff?
It's always in the movies. Somehow. That's right. That's right. You never know when you're in a circumstance where like the bridge gives way, you fling yourself over to the edge, you hang over the edge and you're like, I just got to pull myself up.
Yeah. Or even just to get out of the pool.
I hear you. And you got to pick your moment sometimes.
Yeah.
Thanks for chiming in on that one.
Yeah. Thanks, Ed.
Shall we get into this paper?
Let's do it.
Okay.
Enough aspirational exercises. Let's get into it.
I could go on about that, I'm sure. Okay, so the aim of this paper is to understand the factors influencing participation in community-based gym exercise for young adults with cerebral palsy. In this qualitative study, the team used semi-structured interviews for 39 young adults with cerebral palsy aged between 15 and 30 years with GMFCS levels 1 through to 5, following a peer-supported gym-based exercise program called FitSkills. With the overarching theme being finding what works for me, young adults identified 4 interrelated themes that influence whether gym participation worked for them or not. This includes psychological factors, social participation, context, organisational and logistical support and cost.
Thank you for that summary, Dana.
You're very welcome.
All right, Georgia, let's set the scene a little bit. Can you tell us what we know currently about inactivity and condition sequelae in people with cerebral palsy? Because I feel like this is, important context for the topic that we're going to get into today.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess the first point to make would be that CP itself is not a progressive condition, but what we do tend to notice in adulthood is that there is a decline in function as this group age. So particularly, I guess, in that GMFCS 2 to 4 kind of range where they might start to use gait aids or start to use a wheelchair later in their life. And that I guess can be related to a few different things. There's changes to their muscles and bones as they age, so they start to see some of the impacts of their spasticity, weakness, and postural deformity. And then there's this whole early aging process that we see as well. So Mark Peterson in the US has done a lot of work on that, but we see earlier onset of conditions like heart disease, diabetes, osteoporosis, and at the same time, they are much less active than peers that don't have a disability. So we know how much influence physical activity can have on those cardiometabolic conditions and things like building strength and cardiovascular fitness. So I guess that they're all quite interrelated, and that's where I guess we see the potential for physical activity to have really good impact on the function and the health and well-being of that group.
Yeah. And just on that well-being point, I think, a lot of what we know is focused around the physical benefits of physical activity, but I think we're starting to appreciate more some of the other benefits to being physically active beyond just those physical ones. Can we talk a bit about, I suppose, the social or more well-being elements?
Yeah, for sure. So I think it's happening more in the mainstream world. So definitely in physical activity literature more generally, there's recognition of the mental health benefits of participating regularly in exercise. And I think in the mental health field as well, it's becoming more of a part of treatment, like mental health treatment. And it's starting to be recognised in the recreation industry as well, like in their promotion of their health promotion. But I think for people with physical disabilities, we definitely, in terms of the literature, we still tend to have quite a focus on the physical outcomes of any interventions for that group. And so we don't actually really know a lot about how physical activity impacts mental health and wellbeing for people with disabilities.
I guess it's always a thing of how you measure it, right? I feel like in the other spaces, we've got more recognition because we've got more tools that we can measure this with now. And I think it's quite hard to measure that in different sort of clinical populations. But these are all things that we can relate to ourselves. How many times, I often have like a sore neck. Probably it's because I sit in front of the computer and a really bad posture and I should know better. But, what's the best remedy for that often is I make sure I exercise and I go for a walk. I don't cause harm to it. But you do know how you feel after that. And you're like, oh, yeah, it's gone. Like my headache's gone. And there are things that we know that happen physiologically that are relevant to all human bodies, right? It's really good that you've talked about all the aspects of physical activity, which we've spoken about many times now, haven't we? Yeah. So we know that, we often talk about children and then we talk about adults with cerebral palsy, but yours is really unique in that we're talking about that transition phase. What are some of the things we really need to consider during this transition phase?
Good question. I think transition to adulthood is, again, it's really important for all of us. So, we're really in that phase of life. We're really developing our independence, our starting to make decisions about what we want to participate in and how we want to participate. And there's that really strong kind of social connection, like building your social networks and really developing your sense of self. And that, I think, is the same when we're talking about people with cerebral palsy. But there is an increased sort of prevalence of mental health conditions like depression as they go through adolescence and into adulthood. And we do know that they tend to have smaller social networks into adulthood. So I guess in Australia we have a lot of supports and services that are available when you're a child, and then they really decrease once you turn 18. So I guess being able to support someone during that transition, mid-teens into your early 20s really means that you're helping to set that person up for life in our Australian setting where there isn't as much support available.
Yeah.
There's often those real hard cutoffs, or there traditionally was, and I suppose there is still remnants of that in our community, even though funding structures are more more lifelong. But even you think about hospitals, pediatric to adults, I know it's a source of anxiety for parents and the children going, what happens after this?
Yeah.
Finishing school, all that support.
And they kind of all coincide, don't they? It's all of those structured opportunities for connection and interaction tend to drop off at the same time. Yeah.
And suddenly all these things happen that we know that happen in cerebral palsy in terms of that speedier aging process. So you feel like you're not as fit, you don't feel as strong, and so all that happens in that time. It's a big period to really consider.
Yeah. So for young adults with CP who are trying to be physically active, what does that look like in out in the big wide world? Because and I know it's a very heterogeneous condition that we're talking about, and this is at a very general level, but I suppose there's things that able-bodied people might not think about or consider when you're talking about the act of being physically active and all the things that they would need to think about when trying to do that. So can we talk about what some of those things might be?
Yeah, for sure. I think that opportunities is really lacking for adults with particularly physical disabilities. So there isn't a lot of structured activities or physical activities that are available once you become an adult. And I mean, prior to this paper, I did do a systematic review looking at community-based physical activity for people with physical disabilities, and it was really environmental factors that were played the biggest influence on their ability to be active in their community. So particularly physical environment, which I think is kind of intuitive when you're thinking about physical disability, that you need to have access to places, to equipment, things that are adaptable and things that, simple as change rooms that you can use. But the other big one was the social environment. And so that was really looking at like the attitudes and the behaviours of the people that were in that exercise setting. So whether it be sport or the gym, it's the staff, the coaches, the other patrons and your teammates and their attitudes and behaviours that can really play such a important role. Yeah,
absolutely.
Oh, I mean,
I think that holds true for everyone, doesn't it? But it would be especially the case, when, for these young people that we're talking about who have those additional barriers to physical activity and to it being accessible to them.
Right, I mean, I remember the first time I went into a gym and you see this piece of equipment, you're like, I don't know what to do with it. And, then you see really competent people who seem to know what they're doing and you feel out of place and, what's the etiquette? What are the rules around how this works? It's all very new, and that's something that you experience as you become an adult, right? It's that whole transition again because you start to do more on your own. Yeah. It's a really interesting thing to consider. And I guess maybe now really specifically about FitSkills, which is what you've based your qualitative study on. Can you tell us a little bit about what that program actually is?
Yeah, so FitSkills is an exercise program that's based in the gym. It was developed here in Melbourne by one of my supervisors, so that's Professor Nora Shields. And I guess it's a 12-week, twice-a-week gym program, and it is run in a local community gym.
Wonderful.
And it's an evidence-based program, so all of the exercise prescription is done by a physio or an EP and based on, the strength recommendation, like a strength training program. So I guess what's really unique about it, though, is that it's got a real peer support element to it. So every young person who does the program gets matched up with a student mentor. So because they it was run through La Trobe Uni. They recruited through the health sciences field. So it could be a physio student or an OT student, speech, podiatry, nursing. It really didn't have to be someone who had exercise experience or exercise knowledge, but just someone who would provide peer support for that 12 weeks while they went to the gym and exercised together.
Wow. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Gosh. And how many people participated in that? It sounds pretty intensive.
Yeah.
In terms of the breadth of the study.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's been running for about 10 years though. And so there's been smaller studies leading up, but this one that this paper related to was a big feasibility trial. So there was 123 young people who were aged 13 to 30 with a disability that went through the program in gyms like all across Melbourne. So it was a pretty big trial.
Yeah. That's incredible.
Yeah.
Well, that's really important context. So talk to us then about the participants in this paper, this qualitative paper. How did you collect this data, and tell us a little bit, I suppose, broadly about the participants that you had in your study?
Yeah, so I was looking at 15 to 30 years old, so focusing more on that late teens and that transition phase into adulthood, and cerebral palsy. So that was the particular group that I was interested in. It was a qualitative study, so we were really looking to see what their experiences were with the program. There was other outcome measures and things that were done that formed part of other papers, but this one was really about their experiences exercising in the gym.
Yeah. And that's really important context to draw meaning out of some of those other I suppose more quantitative outcome measures, isn't it? Like we always talk about this kind of the complementary nature of quantitative and qualitative data, and that qualitative component is really rich, I think, and adds a lot to our understanding about how we might try and implement these types of studies more broadly, or, scale them up, what's working, what's not, what do people take away from that as participants in these studies.
So much great information and all of that. And I guess that's the value of what it is that we're about to talk about in terms of the results, hey?
Yeah.
Okay, so your overarching theme in terms of results was finding what works for me. So I noticed that you sort of had these 4 main themes out of that. So let's go through them like one by one. And I know that they're all kind of related, really. I think they all kind of really feed into each other, which is the beauty of qualitative research as well, is that you can find these themes and bring them all down. It's like magic, actually. I mean, there's a lot of work behind it, but how you can come up with it. It's amazing. So the first one, let's talk about the psychological factors. Talk more about what you actually found there.
Yeah. So, I mean, we talked before about that there is that focus on physical benefits at the moment.
Yeah.
But what I will say is that a lot of the participants, they did talk about physical motivators for joining, and they did talk about physical outcomes, but the way that they really talked about it was related to things like their confidence, their in the gym environment, or in their daily other daily activities like school and work.
Yep.
And their sense of self when they were participating in other life activities. So that was really how they talked about even the physical outcomes. It really related to their sort of psychosocial well-being at the end of the program.
Yep. Yeah.
Whereas before the program, similarly, they talked about a lack of confidence in the gym, or in that, like you mentioned before, Dana, like knowing what to do, the etiquette, how to fit in.
Yeah.
That was all very strong in their worries before the program. And it was just a really interesting finding from the paper for me that I think, being a physio, I probably did come into it thinking that they were going to talk all about how strong their legs were and how much fitter they were. Yeah. But they really did focus a lot on the psychological factors that influence whether or not they, felt comfortable in the gym or to get started in the gym, and then how that changed over the 12 weeks that they worked out.
Yeah. And that highlights probably an important point that we didn't cover when we talked about your participants and how you came to speak with them in the context of this study. So were you talking with them and interviewing them at the conclusion of the program? So asking them to reflect on their time in FitSkills?
Yeah. So they were all interviewed within about, I think about 2 to 8 weeks of the program finishing. Yeah. So it was still fairly fresh in their minds, but they had some time to reflect on, on their experience.
Yeah.
And I guess that just shows again the power of that reflection as well. There is, it's a 12-week program, and you can't do physical fitness stuff fast anyway, because we talk about just purely muscles, rest and recovery. We've spoken about that. We all need to make sure that our muscles can rest and recover, but you also need time to work through some of those factors. You got to think about reflecting on your last session, and maybe imagine what it'd be like to go to your next session and where your gym equipment might be, and just, that sort of mental mapping of what that next session might look like. You've got to give yourself time. So it's not something that you want to hopefully, give up too early, because things will change over that time. And that's reassuring for people to know that as well. But it's good to actually have some data that actually shows that change that can happen over time.
Yeah. And I think the 12 weeks worked really well for them in that sense, because it was long enough to try, to commit to trying something new, but not too long that if it wasn't working for them, they didn't have to commit to it forever. So I think the 12 weeks was a good familiarization time.
Georgia, the second theme that you spoke about was the social context of participation. And let's kind of unpack that a little bit more, because I think one of the things that came out was that, FitSkills is obviously filling a bit of a service gap for these young people. What were some of the other, I suppose, social benefits of being involved in the program?
Yeah, so it definitely filled a service gap in terms of being an opportunity for us, particularly the adults.
Yeah.
But it also filled a gap in terms of social connection and peer support. So one of the big draw cards of FitSkills for many of the participants was that they would have someone around their own age as their peer mentor in the gym.
Yeah.
And having that peer mentor, so that's really what FitSkills did, was change the context of that social context in the gym.
Yeah.
So they had, instead of going by themselves and trying to work it out, they had someone with them.
Yeah.
And if we talk about attendance and involvement being those really two aspects of participation, the peer mentor really helped with both. So it was incentive to get to the gym and meet their buddy, and also and then exercising alongside them really helped them with the involvement part of participation. So feeling like they belonged there, and learning together and just working things out together, because the buddy didn't necessarily have that exercise experience either. So they were both working out how to exercise in the gym.
Almost starting from the same point together, which is nice.
I love that, working together.
Yeah.
And, when you talk about the attendance and the involvement, I think, from an attendance point of view, having that peer buddy to have to show up for each session adds that level of accountability, doesn't it? I'm just thinking about when I tell my friend I'm going to a Pilates class, then I feel like, I can't really make an excuse then. I have to go.
Exactly. Yeah.
So true.
But I love that, they're then working together on how to be involved in that session once they're there together and working that out as a team. I find that really, really positive.
Yeah, and they all had different sort of relationships with their peers, but I guess that was what came out that was common across all of them, and just made exercise a little bit more fun for them all. Yeah,
and I'm interested as well, because I know, whenever you talk about relationships and these kind of peer support networks, we assume that they're, largely positive, but did you hear about any instances where perhaps that relationship or that support system wasn't so positive?
Yeah, of course. I mean, at the end of the day, it's all people and putting people together.
Yeah.
So it all depends on the personalities and the attitudes of each party. So overall they were positive, but there was a few cases where people had more negative experiences. I guess one part usually related to scheduling. So sometimes it was hard to get the relationship sort of clicking with the mentor because they might have different schedules they were trying to work around, and it was harder to get to the gym at the same time.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there was a couple of participants whose mentors they didn't consider that they were really attentive enough or maybe there for the right reasons, and that kind of negatively impacted on their involvement in the program, because they still did the program and they still saw benefits from doing the exercise, but the peer relationship didn't work as well for them.
Yeah, it's fair to acknowledge that. And I imagine there'd be a difference between whether someone's functioning within GMFCS level 1 versus 3 or 4, and what that peer support mentor might have had previous experience with, because they may not have had that before, or, those sort of interactions, they're new learning curves too, but that is also the reality of doing more within the community. Did you see anything based on that at all, on the different levels?
I don't think it was particularly based on the GMFCS levels. All of the mentors do go through sort of a bit of a training program. So it might be new to them to interact with people with disability, but they do have a bit of sort of base knowledge that they get through the training program. It really... it wasn't so much related to the mobility level. I think it was more related to their attitude towards, I guess, their role in the program and their motivation. So,
And I think that's a relatively universal experience, isn't it? There's, largely positives, and there's a few times that that those relationships are challenging, but I suppose there's always an opportunity to learn something from that, and lessons that you can take forward in future opportunities to work with people or learn from people. So
So the next theme was around, which is kind of a little bit related to what we were talking about before, but organisational and logistical support, which I imagine would be something that it needs a lot of consideration. So tell us a little bit more about what some of those factors were with regards to organisational and logistics.
Yeah. So I think this is probably not new to like, it's always a barrier to physical activity participation for people with disability, and our participants really recognise that as well. So I mentioned before it was filling a gap, and so one of the gaps that it filled for parents was that it was a really structured and coordinated program, and so FitSkills itself did relieve some of the logistical and organisational burdens, in that they didn't have to find a physio to do their program, or they didn't have to find a peer mentor or find a gym even. That all of that was organised by FitSkills, but of course they still had to be able to get to the program. They had to coordinate the schedule with the peer mentor, so they did that between themselves. And so, I suppose it's just always something that is going to be front of mind when we're thinking about physical activity for this group. And
I suppose one of the other things, particularly when we're talking about the gym setting and programs that operate within, that more formal structured gym environment, is cost. Can we talk a little bit about that?
So I guess that was the sort of final big theme that came out, because FitSkills running as a research program was free for the participants. So cost always comes up as a big barrier for physical activity participation, and so that was one attraction of the program. But FitSkills itself, it does run as a for service program in the real world. And so I guess it was a facilitator for a lot of the families that wanted to try it as an opportunity, because gym membership costs and casual entry are often seen as quite expensive. And for our participants, they didn't feel like paying. So this is after they finished the FitSkills program. They didn't feel like paying for a gym membership was really value for money for them. If they're only going once or twice a week, that wasn't worth it. And then they also have to obviously pay for the additional things that relate to their disability, like getting to the gym if they can't get there themselves, and also a support worker if they need a support worker to come and assist them with personal care or transport.
I mean, there's a lot of things to consider, isn't there? I mean, that's why teams of researchers are working to try to find ways to break down those barriers, because we know there are these barriers and cost is one of them. And we know that we're so fortunate in Australia to have the National Disability Insurance Scheme, the NDIS. And whilst you can access that funding, you need to plan to have that funding and you need to think ahead of time for it. So there are things that need to be considered, and the role that therapists and families can play in helping to create those plans is really significant. But again, requires that organisation and logistics to be able to overcome those barriers, right? They don't just happen, unfortunately.
No. They're very closely related, because yes, you can get the funding for the transport and the support worker, but then it's often up to the family to try and coordinate all of those things again to get to the gym, which then isn't covered cost-wise. So
that's right. And hopefully if you can get there, we know we can have these benefits, right, so that we've spoken about. So we do want to try to find ways to get there. So I guess just to bring it all together then, what will be your top tips for different groups of people that are involved in the participant's life? Like, what would you say from what you found in all of this? What would you recommend?
I think, well, like you just mentioned, for clinicians, I think if we can try and keep some of these factors in mind when we're trying to plan physical activity for our clients. So, partnerships are really important, I think. And if you can have like a good partnership with the support coordinators and partnerships with leisure and recreation organisations, and then obviously the family that you're working with, I think that's probably one of the things that can help to identify and then overcome some of the barriers.
And I guess it's just noting that there's value for money. So that at the end of the day is what we need to be able to demonstrate. And if we can show that we can keep someone more active and part of their community and, be able to do what they want to be able to do, and daily health and well-being, they're all just key factors when you think about the main outcomes you want to get. So we just need to be able to highlight why it's important, why it's necessary.
And in the paper, Georgia, you mentioned that we might need to reconsider how we actually prompt people to be physically active. What does that mean? Can you talk to us a little bit more about that?
So I guess going back to what we discussed at the beginning about the focus on physical benefits, it really did come out quite strongly from the participants that there was all these other things going on in terms of confidence and sense of self and the ability to try something and develop their own preferences. So I think when we're talking about physical activity to these families and to these clients, and also when we're justifying things in terms of what supports that they need and what funding that they require, if we can really try and keep some of those additional mental health and social benefits at the forefront, then that was really important to the participants in this study. So I just I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to probably expand our health promotion for this group.
Hard agree.
I reckon, yeah, I love it. Because you can talk about, they increase their manual muscle testing score, their handheld dynamometry by this, but what does it mean for that person? And at the end of the day, that's what the NDIS is for. It's about the participant being able to reach their goals and aspirations. It's all about that. So
and what's going to keep them coming back? Is it a change in X variable that's related to their motor function, or is it the psychological benefits that they get from being physically active? It's probably a combination, but on a day-to-day basis, it's probably how it's making them feel.
And long-term, just the health economics of it, right? So you don't need a physio for every single time you go to the gym. I mean, we'd love to go all the time, but the reality is you don't need us all the time. You can have it set up and get the right supports in place. And I think that's powerful and really, really important moving forward.
And then you're giving someone opportunities to develop their social networks and their place within their own local community. That is,
so we don't get in the way, because we get in the way. We just don't get in the way. Yeah.
So Georgia, where to from here? What are the next steps for you in this work?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question. I'm obviously doing my PhD studies in this area, so I'm hoping to finish up at the end of the year.
Fabulous.
But I'm also an investigator on a Vic Health grant, so a statewide program here in Victoria where we're working with in partnership with gyms to look at the social support and the cost factors. So we're really hoping to shed a bit more light on how people with disability are currently supported in the gym, and also how some of those cost barriers can be addressed.
Wonderful.
So hopefully there'll be some really practical and useful information that comes out of that. And being a clinician, we always just want really practical, useful strategies and tips and things for our practice. So that's really my aim from my work, is to hopefully have some good.
It's great translation.
Yeah, that's really exciting.
Useful things. Yeah,
that's wonderful. Oh, that's really exciting, and that's definitely you've got we're 100% behind it. It's not you needed us to be behind it, but we love it.
We're advocates.
Absolutely. Well, Georgia, thank you so much for going through that paper. We're not done yet. We thought we'd just bring back the Tell It to Ed segment for this, because I think there'll be some great things that we can talk about from it. So for all of our listeners, here we go. Tell It to Ed. Ed, as you know, is our producer. He doesn't have a background in child health, but he has been listening. He's been taking notes, I'm sure. So this is a great opportunity, Georgia, for you to summarise your work in about 60 seconds or so to someone who isn't a researcher or a clinician. And Ed, in turn, will have time for a question. So, Georgia, take it away to Ed.
Okay. Hi, Ed. So in this study, I interviewed 39 young adults with CP about their experiences exercising in the gym for 12 weeks with a peer mentor who was their gym buddy. We found some really interesting findings relating to how it influenced their confidence, their sense of self, their mood, and their self-efficacy. And the reason that is really interesting to us as researchers is because we often associate physical activity with physical improvement benefits for people with disability. And it was really the social involvement and the psychological health that were talked about the most by this group. So yes, this paper gives us some valuable information for how we can try and engage with young people.
Lovely. Well done, Georgia. Well done.
I don't know how long that was.
That was very good. Yeah. That was very good. All right, Ed, your turn for a question.
Well, I really love this. I love the whole gym and fitness thing, and it's been a few years since I've been at the gym, but I do remember my time at the gym and how impactful it was in terms of physical fitness and how I felt and the people that I went to the gym with. And this episode's been great, and I think you've covered pretty much all of the topics that I might have asked a question on. So I guess my question is probably in relation to the translation of this and where this is kind of going. And there is this sense that the gym industry is very unregulated. It doesn't have a lot of regulation. So this is why this is a layman's segment. So I guess my question is about what kind of policies can be put in place by governments or funding bodies that can kind of help make gyms more accessible and kind of add these types of programs. And is there something on the horizon? Is there something that like is not known about by the general populace, like people like myself? Or do we have a plan to kind of help integrate these kind of things into society and community as a whole?
Good question, Georgia.
That is a great question. I guess we do actually know that exercise is safe for most people with disability. I mean, similar to the rest of us, if you've got like specific conditions or that you might need medical clearance for. But for the most part, it is safe. And so I think there's, like you said, there's not any particular regulation in terms of like disability training or auditing gyms, anything like that, if they're already offering programs. I think that I'm not sure what my thoughts are on having things like audits, but I do think that having really strong partnerships is probably the way to go. So developing programs that are, in partnership, for instance, with a university or a disability organisation, clinicians, like if we're all involved in the development of a program and then can evaluate the sort of impact of it, then I think that's probably the best way to make sure that it's, I guess, the best design, most appropriate thing for whichever group you're trying to involve in the gym. Does that sort of answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. I think I just kind of had in mind about where this kind of breeds greater community and better understandings for people, because obviously gyms can be very busy places and people with disabilities or other conditions, it's not always easy to navigate through a gym. That's been my experience anyway. So I guess those are my thoughts on it. Yeah,
almost like not an accreditation, but a process that a gym could go through to say, look, we're accessible, we're welcoming, we want you to come and use our space and feel comfortable doing that kind of thing.
How can they say they're accessible, right? Because it's accessible just like one piece of equipment they can use. Great, I'll have great triceps. Is there anything else that you can say that I'm accessible? So there's at least an X amount of equipment that's accessible. And then your bathrooms are actually accessible, not just like slightly bigger but no table. There's things that you could probably say to promote yourself as being accessible, which I think people increasingly want to be able to say that. And that's the great thing about our community. Great question.
Yeah, thanks, Ed.
Very thought-provoking. Yeah, nice one. Well, Georgia, thank you so much for being on the show today. It's so lovely to be able to talk to fellow clinicians and researchers who are passionate about areas like we similarly are, and to be able to see the work that's been done. So thank you and congratulations on getting your way through the PhD. Nearly done.
Yeah.
Nearly there.
All the best with submission. How exciting.
Right. Yeah, so exciting.
Thank you.
So to all of our listeners, remember you can head to our website, researchworks.net, where you can get access to the show notes and the link to the paper as well. So, and also, of course, a CPD form there that you can fill out if you want to keep this as part of a record of your PD requirements. But for now, we say thank you very much once again, Georgia. Thank you.
No worries.
And
thank you so much for having me.
Oh,
thanks for coming on.
Pleasure. Yeah. And to everyone else, we'll talk to you all again next time. Bye.
Bye.